All right. Welcome to Shelf Help. Today we're speaking with Bryan Shelton, who's joining us from Rogers, Arkansas, which is right outside of Bentonville, Walmart's home base. And Bryan heads up all things sales and marketing at Giorgio Fresh, which is the retail and food service division of Giorgio Companies, which is a mushroom farm that started in 1920 and has since become one of the largest edible mushroom cultivators and marketers in the world. And before jumping on board with Giorgio Fresh, Bryan held at various sales leadership roles at some pretty big names like Monte, Pinnacle Foods, Kellogg, etc. So yeah, with that, let's get into it. So Bryan, first off, just for the listeners that maybe are not as familiar with Giorgio Fresh, just give us a quick lay of the land in terms of origin story, kind of the why behind the brand, core products you offer, and maybe just a few examples of where the listeners can get their hands on them.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. No, appreciate it. No, it's a great story. I've been here almost coming up on 3 years, and not to correct you, but our 100th birthday will be we started in 1928, so we're 3 years away
Excellent.
from our 100-year anniversary, and we're third generation owned. Peter Georgi is our single shareholder. He is the great grandson of Pietro, and his father Fred passed it on to him. And we started in Blandon, Pennsylvania, as a mushroom farm and mushroom growing operation, and has since expanded. Right, we started, obviously growing fresh mushrooms. Then we went into canned mushrooms. Then we converted from canned mushrooms into largely fresh. But we are vertically integrated, where we have the canning operation and all of our own growing operations. But we also are diversified uniquely in that we own a domestic can manufacturing company. We have two different facilities under a different company outside of Giorgio, but it's under the Giorgio group of companies, which is Can Corp. And then we also own a global bottling and canning manufacturing company that's in 17 different countries, and that is called
Wow.
Can Pack. So Peter is the single shareholder over all those businesses, which really makes it fun because quick decision making. We're somewhat insulated from global economic, stress because we are pretty diversified. And the beauty is, Peter just reinvests in the business aggressively, which really makes us unique and makes it fun, right? As we're reinventing the mushroom industry as it speaks, because it is 100 years old. We do everything from fresh produce to canned products. And now we're leaning into innovation along the value add space. So whether that be our stuffed mushrooms, our savory sauté, we're actually stuffing peppers now. We're coming out with something new called grill packs, just trying to make mushrooms more exciting and convenient. And you can find our mushrooms at many of the larger regional and national grocers, whether that be in the Giorgio label or within the customer's private label. So yeah, we're pretty easy to be found. Our value add items are all under the Giorgio label, so they're usually the easiest to find.
Man, that's really cool. I didn't know it was that much of a dynamic business. It almost, when you said like the canning and the bottling divisions, it almost made me think of, I think when Jeff Bezos, I think he always talked about Amazon, whenever they saw they had like an internal cost center, they would say, how can we turn this into a profit center? It sounds like it might be something similar. Obviously, CPG companies have a packaging cost. Yeah, why don't we turn that into a profit center and we can start selling bottles and cans to
Yeah.
other companies too?
Well, the canning company actually started. They got frustrated back in the day when Peter's dad was running the company of the can prices from the can manufacturers, and they're like, you know what? Let's figure it out ourselves, and we'll start doing that. And then
Yeah.
then our first acquisition was from the country of Poland to get into bottling from the government, and then we just expanded from there. So it's really. And like I said, I'm scratching the surface on those businesses, but it's pretty cool to get access and learn from all global different companies.
Yeah, totally. Now, I know you spent a fair amount of time, as I mentioned at the beginning, with, in what a lot of my people might think of as traditional CPG, like, snacks, frozen meals, etc. And also a lot of time in the broader, I guess you can tell me if I'm defining as wrong, like the produce category, where it's, fruits and veggies at Del Monte, now mushrooms at Georgia. And I was just curious, like, as you've been in both of those worlds for so long, what are just some of the biggest differences between the two in terms of the way that you approach sales and marketing? I know that's a broad question, but I'll
Yeah,
let you take whoever you want.
no, I didn't. So on the Delmonte side, I was on the packaged goods side, so on the can side
Okay.
of things. So we had a produce side of the division. It was in the little cups in the refrigerated section, but I'd never really, this is my first foray into straight produce. And there are a couple things that were kind of blew my mind initially. And number one is shelf life, right? We have about 14 days of shelf life when we pick fresh to get through the entire supply chain into our customers' cupboards for consumption in their refrigerators, I guess, not the cupboards. And that changes the dynamic of decision making, of how we transport our items into the stores, to the food service. So I would say that the shelf life drove a lot of different decisions, and how we go to market. I always also laugh that in my entire 20 years before this, I never heard of a QA manager ruining my day from a customer. And then right away you realize the gatekeeper is a QA manager in the produce space. So, being able to, they're investing and really taking a look and inspecting your product. So to make sure we're bringing the best possible product to their customers' shelves every day. So that was an interesting dynamic. I think the other thing, Adam, the one that I've really enjoyed is in the produce space, we're all growers at heart. So there's a relationship there and an understanding from our customers that can be a little bit more of a relationship dynamic, because come visit our farm, you'll see how we're growing these mushrooms. And it's not just flipping the mushroom machine on at higher speed to produce faster. So there's an understanding that Mother Nature causes some calamities in the crop, et cetera. So I really appreciate that there's value in many years of relationships and trust because of the growing aspect of the process.
Yeah. And that's interesting. I mean, I think in traditional CPG, building long-term brand equity is, part of the core strategy. And in produce, it seems like it can be a bit more of a commodity driven, at least to a certain extent, probably some categories more than others. And I'm just curious, like, how you think about brand building differently if you do it all across these two worlds.
Yeah, I mean, the branding efforts are definitely fewer in the produce space. Some have done them extremely well. There's examples all over the place, but it's all about some form of product differentiation, whether it's in the product, whether it's in the packaging, whether it's in the benefits that allow you to brand something versus being commoditized. Hence our value add line. We were the first, we do it really well. We feel like we do it the best. So that is the one segment of our business that is 100% Giorgio branded. But I really think it's all about differentiation that allows you to brand things and develop that brand, especially in the produce space. And it's a little more challenging, right? Because there's fewer opportunities to do that at its core. So it's evolving. And I think as we reinvent ways to engage the consumer within the mushroom category, convenience, appeal, things like that, will allow us to further build our brand. But at its core, base mushroom is a base mushroom is a base mushroom, right? It's hard to differentiate at this point in the game.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And on a similar track, this is much more of kind of a tactical question from a retail standpoint. What are some of the core tools that a brand in this category typically have in their tool belt, to pitch buyers and achieve sustained success at retail? I'm just talking about, things might be considered pretty typical, whether it's sales decks, sales sheets, one pagers, making buyers when you're on the shelf, like shelf talkers, aisle violators, which some stuff it's pretty standard in, like, the package category. But I'm curious, what do those tools look like? And is it pretty similar to traditional CPG, or are there some things that are fairly different to a certain extent?
Yeah, some are, it was a good summary. Some are similar, right? Your pitch deck. Why? How's this new item going to grow the category? It's less data driven in the produce space, but at the same point, it's being able to say what deliver on what you said you were going to do. The number one focus in produce is quality and service. If we can't supply you quality product and deliver it on time to your customers' needs, then it doesn't matter how great this item is. And I think that is much more of a given on CPG, because it's not necessarily coming out of the ground. It could be, it's running through a factory. So it's easy to make boxes of snacks, if you will, or cereal versus growing mushrooms. So I think you really, it's your stamp of quality and service reigns true. And people have long memories in produce space. So hence the connection and the relationships work both ways, right? You're kind of giving your seal of approval on things. So you're going to do everything possible to meet those customers' needs. Once it's on shelf, we're trying to be more creative to drive some of that engagement with the consumer. Whether it's your point earlier, shelf talkers, it's digital interaction, right? Where customers e-commerce, and we're really trying to invest in the customers' platforms so we can engage a consumer before they get in front of the shelf. Our challenge in mushrooms is getting to the younger consumer and adding it to the basket. And we know many of the shopping habits for the younger consumer are different. They're not necessarily walking each aisle of the store. They're using their phone and they're selecting here. So we need to get them before they start placing their order, on social media and other vehicles.
A similar track, this is not necessarily specific to produce. This is just all of your experience in CPG in general. I'm curious what your thought is. I think it seems like the more a brand's retail distribution footprint expands, and we see this a lot in my production design agency, we work with a lot of brands that have a pretty large distribution footprint. And it seems like the more that retail distribution footprint expands, the more like one-off requests a brand can get from specific retailers, whether it's like Costco might be the typical one. They're asking you to launch a specific SKU for them, or maybe it's even Kroger or Safeway or Albertsons or something. They're asking you, hey, can you launch a specific SKU for us? Or we want to do specific collaboration or something like, or maybe it's just retail specific media and ads, that kind of stuff. I'm just curious, like how should brands think about balancing the need to go above and beyond for retailers, especially some of the bigger ones, versus, maintaining margins? Because I assume the more you take on those one-off requests, it, adds the cost from like a labor standpoint, any specific packaging stuff. Like, does that question kind of make sense? So how do you kind of think about that?
Yeah, it does, Adam. And I think, working with smaller brands that were earlier in my career that were built from scratch in the frozen space, you need to invest in order to build the business. Unless you have the greatest innovation, it's really hard to say, I'm going to give me full distribution and I want to make sure it's margin accretive to the rest of my portfolio. Those are unicorns. Those rarely happen throughout the year. So I think you need to invest to build a business. And then once you have the business, you can find ways to build some profitability in it. And then to your question about one-offs from retailers, my philosophy and one of my mentors over the years said it's never no when a retailer comes to you. It's yes if. So typically, if they're asking you to invest in one of their platforms, there's a trade-off there. Yes, we can do that if we can get some greater distribution in this region. Would you like create a unique item for us so we have the initial runway? Yes, but can you also support us here? And I think the goal of elevating some of those partnerships allow you to have those trade-offs. So it's not necessarily a zero-sum game where you feel like you're putting all the work into the relationship. There's a balance there. So that's usually been, some of the best partnerships have led to that yes if, and there's a win-win for both parties.
I think that's a great way to look at it. Shifting gears a little bit, talking about innovation, formulation, new product development, commercialization, that kind of stuff in this produce category. Like I'm curious what this looks like in the produce category for some of the biggest brands. And as an example, like how do you test and scale something like a new sauté kit or like stuffed mushroom flavor, for example?
Traditional CPG, a lot of it is heavy consumer testing to understand the white space. And then within the white space, you start figuring out what's an item that will deliver within that white space. And then you bring it to the marketplace. I'd say in produce, just from the overall innovation investment dollars aren't necessarily there. So I think it's more customer driven, a little bit of consumer driven, where we do a lot of reading. You walk the aisles of the store, you understand what's hot, and then it's capability driven. What can we do within our existing asset or co-packer base that delivers in what the customer just said they're looking for and what we know the consumer is skating towards? So it's a little bit of it's a little mix there. Between those three versus traditional CPG. And we do a lot of the one challenge in produce, because very rarely in produce do you have like a national customer says, Giorgio, you're going to supply every one of our DCs nationally. Largely, it's really hard to happen. So you're going to have a portion of the DCs. So to scale things is really challenging. So it's typically a softer launch with commitment from one of your larger customers to get it on its feet. And then we start doing the selling and the scaling. It's been the one challenge as we've become more innovation driven at Giorgio is how do we scale quicker and faster with some of these new item launches, knowing the dynamic of the produce space.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. On the similar track of like commercialization, innovation, talking about packaging design, my sense is that opportunities to stand out via packaging design may be a bit more limited in the produce compared to traditional CPG, but could also maybe potentially be a way to really stand out if brands explore different packaging form factors or not just like design applications and the aesthetics of the packaging form factor. Does this sound right, or am I way off here?
No, I think you're right. I think for a while, produce space was we are what we are. We might have tried something in the past, it wasn't ready, and consumers weren't ready for it. But as the consumers change and the demographics change, I think the need for packaging innovation is there, whether it's product visibility, packaging that allows to see the freshness, packaging that allows you to do some billboard advertising, for, when it's on shelf and impact on shelf. And also it's the long-term sustainability aspect of it. While consumers say it's important to them, I don't know if they want to, it's not proven that they want to spend extra for it, but it's important long-term that you have a plan that your packaging is sustainable for the long term. And
Yeah.
I think uniquely, we've realized that many of the packaging trends start over in Europe. Understanding what's going on there, many times it kind of crosses the pond over here, and understanding what's going on there, why, the whys and whats, and that's been interesting to understand what that looks like.
Let's just say, hypothetically, I came to you and I told you, "Hey, Brian, I'm getting ready to launch a new brand in the produce space, some sort of branded produce brand, and I'm about to kick off packaging design. What are a few things or like frameworks or tips that you give me, or on the opposite side, things to watch out for that could trip me up?"
Yeah, no. Well, I think first and foremost, you want something that's shoppable on shelf, and then meets the parameters of your larger customers, whether it's a push shelf or whether it sits in the well. How does that product present itself to the customer, and from a shoppability, really explaining the benefits of what you're selling. I think the big watch out is you could have the greatest innovation of packaging innovation as you could dream up, but if it doesn't hold up, it doesn't extend or meet the shelf life requirements of the old packaging, or extend it, or allow really the quality of the product to be protected, it doesn't matter. So you really have to remember at its core is, can you protect the quality of the product and protect the shelf life of it? Because if not, then it's just not worth it in the produce space.
Let's say I was a brand leader at a produce focused brand, and I'm already in the market. And I told you, "Hey, we're considering a packaging refresh." Like, what questions might you ask me to help me confirm if this is even the right strategy in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. We're working a little bit on a brand refresh ourselves that comes in part and parcel with packaging. I think it's really understanding what is the core value of your brand and packaging delivers, and understanding that what it is today, right? What is the value proposition that your brand and packaging delivers today? Then once you understand that, I think it allows you to then adjust to more aspirational values that you're going to trying to achieve with your change. But if you don't understand what it looks like to begin with, you could make unnecessary changes that could be negative to your existing business. So I think understanding where you play and where you sit, and then I think aspirationally, like where are you trying to go with your brand or your packaging? Who's the consumer that you're going after? And once you lean in and make a decision, there's a certain form of testing that you need to go through. In my previous world on the CPG space, we did a brand refresh, and we misunderstood where the equity lied in the eyes of the consumer. We thought it was in the logo of the brand, but in the reality, it was the color behind the brand as it sat in shelf. And it was an expensive, painful lesson to learn when we just not understanding where the equity true lied in the eyes of the consumer.
Yeah. And how do you, Giorgio is probably a good example of this. You said you guys are, going through a potential brand refresh because it's been around for so long. How do you balance the that need for a fresh look. Obviously, that's part of the goal of doing a brand refresh. Also, with that importance of keeping those familiar legacy brand elements for those existing customers, so they'd recognize it still on the shelf when they're walking by. Like,
That's a $1 million question, and that's what we're trying to balance right now, Adam. I'll tell you, for me, it's understanding, like I said earlier, if you're understanding the value proposition that you currently have, and then is there a logical and believable story that links to your refresh that the consumer says still Giorgio, but I see it. It's just a little refreshed. Versus if it's too drastic of a change, it could say, wait, so does that mean you're not the Giorgio? You're trying to distance yourself from the Giorgio brand that we've known for the last 50 years. So I think that's the benefit. There's always the instinct to say, let's be bold. Let's make a big difference. Let's make a change, right? But you have to be careful. And I think for me is if I can logically link the old brand to a refreshed option that makes sense, I think that's the key to success.
yeah, yeah, I know it's a delicate balance for sure. Shifting gears like a little bit, I know you own the food service channel as well, and I think this, for whatever reason, this seems to be a pretty big topic of discussion these days, like more than it has been in the past 2 years for variety of reasons. Might be that, better margins. You don't have to give away as much margin to retail. I'm not exactly sure what it is. You can maybe speak to that too. But at just the high level, from your point of view, like what are the pros and cons of the food service channel and maybe in comparison to traditional retail channels?
Yeah, good question. I'd say, it's a low barrier to entry in food service, right? It's usually an item and a price. It doesn't have to be a million different items, special packaging. It's usually an item or two and a price that gets you in the door. So it makes it very competitive. And sometimes it can be more price driven than I'd like. And some of the differentiation that you bring to the retail channel isn't necessarily as valued as much. So it allows more folks to play in that space. On the upside, it does allow you can scale pretty quickly on a certain item. So you can, whether it's white mushrooms, cremini mushrooms, you can scale up pretty quickly because of the scope of the food service. And there's potentially the packaging costs, et cetera, are more simplified. So it's a nice option in the portfolio, and it's nice to have a healthy balance.
Yeah. And it seems like I have to imagine not every product line or product format makes the most sense in food service. When you think about that category or that channel, what characteristics make a product a strong fit versus ones that may not be that good of a fit for food service?
Yeah, I mean, so much is like many of this food service, the larger ones, the Cisco US Foods, they're gatekeepers, right? And it's their operators that really make the decisions. So you got to make sure what you're bringing to the table, the end user, the operator thinks is beneficial. So I think engaging with them, making sure you're linked up, that whether the packaging format, the product format is usable and convenient for them and holds up for their operations. There are opportunities for innovation, but you have to be more thoughtful, right? And we're actually working on that. Like, how do we scale up some of our innovations to meet this channel? And there's just a little bit more a heavy thought to upsize the package count and et cetera. So something that works while not breaking the cold chain, right? The supply chain, because it is produce.
Yeah. No, that seems totally logical. And maybe for an earlier stage brand that is not in this channel yet, and they're thinking about it, that feels like they feel like their brand could make a lot of sense. What should their strategy look like in terms of opening up this channel and then growing the channel from there once they've kind of found product market fit in this channel?
Yeah, I think it's a really good channel to test innovation, understand if the consumer is going to respond to it. Right about the time I started with Giorgio, we had a great product called pulled pork, and it was like the replacement for pulled pork, but it was portobello's. Great sauce and seasoning, and we started it in the retail channel, but we don't really have the investment dollars to put it on TV and tell everybody where it is, and when they're walking the stores to understand what it is, how to apply it. So I think if we could do it all over again, we would have started with food service, proven it at restaurants to say, oh, wow, I had this great pulled pork sandwich at the restaurant X or Y. I'd love to see if I could get it in store. And we could have, had more proof of concept and that the consumers respond and then bring it to the retail channel. So I think there's definite value in that, especially if you're doing something unique. And like I said, you don't necessarily have the investment to make this monstrous launch to scale up and then communicate to the consumer how to use it and all those good things.
Yeah. I think I've heard you talk about food service as being a brand building flywheel. It sounds like this is exactly kind of what you're talking about.
Absolutely. Yep. Proof of concept, you gain some momentum, people have interest. Oh, where else can we find it? Let's bring it into the retail space. And then it kind of feeds itself. Yep.
Yeah. And how can brands get tripped up in this food service channel, and maybe how can they plan ahead to avoid some of the potential most obvious or maybe not so obvious landmines that they might walk over?
Yeah, I think you have to be aware that it is, from a financial perspective, it is a low barrier of entry. So you're going to have a sharp price point most times. And that's why it's a good balance with all the other channels, because it's very competitive. So I think you just need to be aware. There's typically annual RFPs within this space. If you don't keep your eye on the ball, and you're looking to whether it increase margin, et cetera, someone's always right behind you, because the barrier of entry is a little bit lower than if you were going to do an extreme exotic item on shelf that's an exotic blend with fancy packaging and branding. Well, the barrier of entry for something like that is much, much more challenging.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a good call out. Shifting gears a little bit, I often like to ask about the balancing the focus between velocity and distribution points, because it seems like it's a thing that earlier stage operators sometimes think, hey, I want to get into as many retail points as fast as possible, and that may not always be the smartest route to go. So I'm just curious for the up and coming, especially first time CPG operators, maybe just help them understand, assuming you agree with this statement, like why they should focus on velocity more than expanding distribution points just as fast as possible.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Adam, and it is a balance. You have to prove that I think it's proof that you have a winner first, and understanding. And I think the other key is when you go into, depending on what department, what are the expected velocities within that category where you're placed. There's proliferation of like health and wellness brands across all the different categories. So you got to understand where you're being placed by the retailer. Are you in the conventional space where the velocity benchmarks are up here, or is it the health and wellness where velocity benchmarks are a little bit lower because it is bringing innovation driven and driving trial? But yeah, driving initial velocity, and I think it allows you to focus. Right? Do we have the right trial driving investment? Digital, online, in store. Is it properly placed on shelf so the consumer can see it? Is it priced right? Do we have the right promotional strategy? Once you have that down and you have a winner, it's much easier to scale than scaling right away, guessing, and when you don't have a lot of that stuff figured out. Granted, though, the P&L drives so many decisions, and the most efficient way is to scale immediately for something that you're investing innovation dollars for. But yeah, I do think establishing a winner, the parameters of why it won, what makes it successful, makes it a lot easier and long-term sustainable success when you scale.
When will they know it's the right time to focus on retail expansion as well?
That's a really good point. When I think traditionally, if you're going to, I'll say on the produce space, there's a ton of produce shows and within the space. So you can show a new offering and you get a lot of initial feedback. Oh, I'd love that. That's a winner. Where can I get that? And you do that at CPG as well. But I think you get the concept and you show some of the velocities, how it's performing, and you get some head nods in front of other customers. Then I think you realize it's time to scale. You get some of those soft yeses. Oh, if I can get my hands on that, absolutely, I would take it. So that's how I would do it, which is a little bit more on, old school, right? Getting the product in front of folks, getting some of the data, understanding if we have some soft yeses, and if you feel like you got enough, then I think you make the jump to scale up a little bit.
Yeah, totally. But yeah, Brian, I mean, it's clear you've got a fair amount of wins under your belt in your career at this point. I think, however, some of like the best learning experiences often come from failures or in times when things didn't necessarily go as expected. I'm curious, like what's something that jumps out that took you a while to learn or internalize, but before that light bulb went off, and then it was all of a sudden like, oh man, this totally makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's a really good one. So I'll answer this. I'll try to be succinct. The one is you separate results driven world, but I will say till the day I die, some of my best years results wise weren't necessarily the best work I did. And some of the years where I had the worst results, I did the best work because you're scrapping and crawling to save a business or to overcome an obstacle that was super challenging. While you did all this heavy lifting, it didn't necessarily result in these great year-end numbers, et cetera. So being understand the value of the work and the results and having a healthy balance there, I think was something that was hard for me to initially grasp. Then I think engaging with customers, younger in my career, so much to say, and probably filibustered instead of just taking a step back, asking a lot of questions. And it's amazing, they'll lead you to the answer. So taking a step back, breathing, asking some questions. And then lastly, it was a mentor of mine, whether it's internal public speaking, presenting to a customer, you name it. You want everything to go perfect. And you could stumble because you said a word different or it paused and you realize that they didn't know what you were trying to say. So just own it, right? Move on. Nobody else knew you wanted to say it this way versus that way. So say it with confidence, move on, and everything's going to be okay.
Yeah.
So those are some of the I think the key learnings and lessons, and then I think you said as you work your way up, what was something, that as you work your way up into greater roles and responsibilities, right? I think that was a question you had sent earlier, and that one resonated with me. Another one where it's my old baseball coach adage: fake it till you make it, right? You're there for a reason. No one's questioning your background when you're in that role. So be confident, be assertive, and make decisions, because you're going to learn whether it's the right decision or not. You make a decision, you learn and move on. If you get caught in assumptions and indecision and you're not being assertive, nothing good happens from that. So kind of let it rip, be confident, and then you just move on and learn from it.
Yeah, those are super helpful. I think those would be motivational for a lot of people that are growing in their roles. Last question for you. Any brands or trends in general in the CPG space, whether it's, produce or not, that you're like particularly excited about? Any trends you wish you would have jumped on earlier, thinking back now?
Yeah, no, it's funny. A little plug for the mushroom space, right? No, I've eaten mushrooms my entire life. 2.5 years with Giorgio. I had no idea how many tailwinds mushrooms have with what consumers are looking for. The sustainable growing process. So, the water, it's just circular. We really waste nothing, from the growing of the compost to hand picking, and then all the health benefits of it. Many of those are coming out where people are taking the micro doses of lion's mane, et cetera, that are out there. There is a great story in the mushroom space. We just haven't been able to link the fresh mushrooms with all of those other benefits. So that's what we're really trying to unlock. And I think there's so many health benefits, and it meets a lot of the consumers' needs, that I think that's our next, it's really the ultimate superfood. And how do we do a better job telling our story? I laughed when I first started. It's like, man, mushrooms have this amazing story, but we kept it secret amongst all the mushroom growers. How do we tell it to the broader landscape? So that's what I would say. I think there's a lot of growth there just because it's such an easy story to tell. We just haven't necessarily done a great job telling it, or I think maybe making it easier for folks to consume mushrooms. I think sometimes people need to use their brains when they're when they buy mushrooms. What am I going to use it with? And we really need to remove that barrier. We want it to be mindless. I got my mushrooms and I have 9,000 ways to consume it because I know they're healthy and they're really tasty.
Yeah, I feel like that's super powerful. Well, yeah, Brian, I think this has been really awesome. I think you shared a lot of really valuable insights. I think, yeah, listeners are going to get a lot of value out of this. So where can people find you, follow along with you? And then also where's the best place to follow along with Giorgio as well?
Yeah, so LinkedIn is a great way. You can find me on LinkedIn, and it's just Bryan with a Y. And then Giorgio Fresh has a LinkedIn page, and you can also find Giorgio Fresh on Instagram and Facebook, and we're also on our website. And we're in the midst of redoing our website to make it easier to find and maneuver. So those would be the areas you could find us.
All right, perfect. Awesome. Thanks, Brian. I really appreciate it, and hope you have a good day.